listening to a download from the outdoorstation.co.uk.
Number 323.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to, yes, you've guessed it, another podcast here on the Outdoor Station. To me, writing is like drawing. All of us can do it, but those who can create works of art have a unique gift to take the mundane and paint images that touch the soul. Words are no different, of course. The art of telling a story, in particular a factual travel story, and drawing the reader into the space between the folds of paper, enabling their imagination to escape into the outdoors, is another skill without price. This is the third and final part of the three-part series put together for Resonance FM and the Outdoor Station, where David Lintern joins Chris Townsend for a long walk and some great conversation. Chris is well known around the world as a writer, photographer, blogger, conservationist, head of the Mountaineering Council of Scotland and long-distance walker extraordinaire. Here they discuss his writing, writers who have influenced him, and in particular the life and work of Edward Abbey.
In terms of the writing about walking, I mean, obviously, I'm assuming you keep journals.
Oh, yeah.
And how else do you sort of remember or recount? How do you memorise the experience as well? In other ways, are there any other ways, or is it just mainly
photography?
Photography, and that can trigger the memory as well.
Yes,
yeah.
Quite often, photography, not the the photography for landscape shots, for publication and so on, but the detail.
Sure.
Take photographs of signs.
Right.
Take photographs of curious things that I see. So it's note-taking with a camera.
Yeah.
The photographs themselves may not be very good. I'm not bothered at the time. It's a record.
Yeah.
The light doesn't matter. All that matters is that it's a memory jogger.
Yeah.
So I do that as well.
But
I try on the long walks, to write up my journal at least once a day.
Uh-huh.
Because otherwise it's surprising how fast you forget things. Yeah. And because that's how I began, long before we had any, recording devices of any sort, by doing it in a notebook with a pen, I still do it that way.
Saves on batteries?
Saves on batteries, yeah. Yes.
Did you, going back to, I guess, that question I asked earlier about, how you got started, did you, when you were wandering around those woods, back when you were a young teenager, did you ever imagine that you'd be writing about and have made a career? Do you think of it as a career even?
I don't really think of it as career.
No.
I think it's, it's become what I do.
It's what you do.
I think career's probably a bit grand for it, but that sounds a bit more organised as well,
right,
and planned out ahead, which
it hasn't been.
No. Well, not in the way it's turned out now.
Right.
But at that time when I was wandering around in the woods, I wanted to be a naturalist, to say, because it was, nature study was the interest. And I wanted to be an explorer, because I was interested in that. I was reading accounts of people going and exploring places. And I was interested in writing, but I didn't really link it together. Right. I think I was more thinking of writing as, fiction writing, rather than writing about trips.
Sure.
So if you like, the seeds of it were all there, but not coherently, and certainly not thought out. This is what I'm going to do.
There wasn't no grand plan.
There's never been a grand plan. No.
Good for you.
Never. No.
And I suppose to bring us more up to date, I know you've recently had a book published about Scotland, and I wanted to ask you about that. And I think it took you 6 years, is that right, or ish?
It was 7 years from when I signed the contract to when it was published, and it was originally supposed to be about 3.
Right.
Again, there was no grand plan. I was not aware when I took it on just what was involved, right, which is, now that it's out, that's probably a good thing, because if I had been, I'd probably said no, or I just said, yes, you're going to have to give me a much bigger advance because of the time it's going to take. I wouldn't, because it sort of grew and grew. which is why it took so long to get it all finished.
Sure. And it's called Scotland?
It's called, well, it wasn't my choice of a title, that's the publisher's, but I understand whether it's in a series for Cicerone called World Mountain Ranges.
Sure.
So it's World Mountain Ranges, Scotland. Because it includes the southern uplands as well, it couldn't be World Mountain Ranges, Scottish Highlands.
Right.
And there isn't an overall term for all of the Scottish mountains.
I have to say, I mean, I've only dipped in a couple of times, but it is by all accounts and from what other people have said to me as well, it is a fantastic book. Are you pleased with it?
Yes, I'm pleased with it, and I must think the publishers Cicerone, I think, have done a really good job in how it looks. Uh-huh. I think they've, the design and layout, which of course is all their work. Okay. I sent them the words and photos. It's then, it's up to them
carved up by
to then decide how to, how it should look. I think they've done an excellent job. So I'm really pleased, how it looks.
It does. It is a lovely looking, and it reads beautifully as well, in my view. And who does anyone else do your proofreading, your editing, or anything like that? Does anyone else have a hand in that, or do you do it yourself?
Oh no, you have to. I mean, every publisher will, put a book out to be proofread.
So it's the publisher that does that for you.
And then it comes back to you to check. And I think that becomes essential, because with most of it, you get to the point where you've read things so often, you can't really see them anymore. Yeah. What you don't want, I think every writer would say this, you need a proofreader, you need a sub-editor, you need someone to go through and occasionally pick out and notice that you've used a phrase a bit too often, so deleting a couple of them, things like this, or just picking up, spelling and punctuation errors that you don't see anymore because you know what it's supposed to say and you miss them. You do need somebody to do that. What you don't want, which I've had in the past, not recently, is a sub-editor who tries to rewrite the book and changes things.
Right, gets a bit edgy.
There's a few times where I've spent a lot of time changing everything back to what I originally said.
Oh dear.
Because you get the copy back for you to check. So, they always ask the author, or all the publishers I've worked for will always say to the author, are you happy with this? Is this okay?
Back and forth.
So you approve it. They don't just put it out. And you think, but I never said that, so I'm not happy with it. But obviously with Cicerone, the guy who did the sub-editing on this, was very good. I was very happy with any suggestions he made, and he did it chapter by chapter, so I was in contact with him and so on. And most of it, very little was actually changed. There was a bit of tidying up in places. Sure. And with a big book, there was the problem that you have that, everything has got to work together. By the time you're in the sort of 225,000 words, you might say something that doesn't quite work with something you said in the first 1,000 words, so it's picking out those things as well.
Do you find putting your experiences that you've had out on the trail, do you find that easy? Is it an easy process for you? Is it a case of just transcribing what you've written in your journal? Or?
It depends. Yeah, writing the accounts of long walks or of trips is often, the bones of it in note form are in the journal. And I've just got to tidy them up and write them down and add the odd bit. And mostly, that's the writing I enjoy doing most. And I don't find that difficult. Something like the Scotland book, which isn't an account of trips and so on, and a lot of that was research. A lot of the time was researching stuff and compiling stuff, because as it's a factual book and a guidebook, there were all sorts of things where I thought I need to check that, or I know that, but I need the detail. I can't be precise enough without looking it up. That is actually harder. It takes a lot more time, which is not actually the writing that takes the time.
It's the going and just double-checking.
It's the research.
You might have been there twice before, but you just need, memory jog, or, just go back once again and confirm.
Oh, well, there was the field work as well, which was also, the photographic record. It's not just a question of what are my best photographs of Scotland, send them in, because that might be, great, we've got 100 photographs for the Cairngorms chapter, but we haven't got anything for the islands chapter. So it was filling in gaps. It was, yes, going back to places and thinking, well, I haven't been there for 7 years, I'd better go back and see what it's like now, and I'd better do that again. And in some cases, going to places that I'd managed to miss completely. So I did go to, bits of Scotland I'd never visited before for the book, but it was also, the photographic. I mean, I took the last photographs when we identified the last gaps for the book in April.
Right.
And the book came out in October.
Right. So you were working right up until the hilt.
Right up until the last minute, which I very much like. There is, I've read some nature writing, if you like, or conservation writing, which is a bit too prescriptive, which is basically saying, this is what you should do, this is how you should behave, I'm the expert and I'm telling you. And that, I always have an almost instinctive reaction against that. And one of the things, say, I like with Edward Abbey, is that, he set out to be provocative and to make people think.
Because some of it's quite cantankerous, isn't it? I quite enjoy that myself.
Oh, very, and quite deliberately so. And some of the things, I mean, there's certainly things in Edward Abbey I can remember reading where I thought, no, I don't agree with you here.
Yeah.
But I've realised, but he doesn't want you to agree unless you've thought about it. And that's more important, and I think that matters a great deal. Not to have a knee-jerk reaction to things, just, not to assume things, but to actually think, wait a minute, what does this mean?
Right. Well, listen, we're going to make a move because it's getting a bit chilly, isn't it?
It is a bit chilly. The wind's picked up a bit.
And
yes.
we'll maybe go back to the warmth and maybe just finish off.
This is the Outdoor Station.
This is the copy I bought here, 17985.
Excellent. Whilst
on
you're
the
on
Continental
trail.
Divide trail, so I bought this. Yeah, it's the end of his introduction to the book, and I showed it. To my partner. She said, "What are you going to read?" So I showed it, and she read. And she said, "Well, that's provocative." And I said, well, it's Edward Abbey, so,
you have to take your chances.
You don't want to read something tame from Edward Abbey.
One of the things I love, I think there's a website called Abbey Net.
Yes.
And there's I call it the Abbey Lottery, and you can click on a random quote.
I haven't tried that.
It's worth it, and there's some quite choice ones on there.
Oh, yeah, yes, he was good. He was good at short, memorable quotes.
Yeah, pithy statements. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of quite rude ones on there as well.
What I find odd, and in a way it's sort of sad, is he regarded all of this, all his non-fiction writing, as throwaway stuff, and at times he argued that he did it because he got paid for it.
Okay.
What he regarded himself was as a serious novelist. And he was always, because I've got some of his, journals and diaries and things and notes and so on, and his whole life, he was really disappointed that the literary establishment, in New York and Washington, did not take his novels seriously, and he rails against them and so on. But
I've read little bits. Yeah,
it's sad in a way that he never really understood what he was actually very good at.
Right.
And significant at, and which other people could see, but he couldn't because he got it fit. I want to be a serious novelist. I mean, in a few places, I want to write the great American novel, And so the stuff that everyone else thought was important and made him a significant figure, he didn't take so seriously.
Yeah, I think you possibly might have seen them. There's those great. Well, there's a lot of stuff on YouTube now, but I think I came across it again, as I said before, through bits and pieces that you'd said on the internet. And there's a great website called Canoe in the Mist. I think you.
Oh yes, yeah.
And I know he's a fan. And there's some great old clips of Abbey talking, and that comes across in that he's sort of dealing with. I guess that was talking about sort of that's the climate at the time, isn't it? And obviously, sort of a culture of academic writing and sort of the university system out there, and sort of
well, I suspect, because you get that to some extent here. He was probably right in feeling that the urbanites on the East Coast regarded the Western America as sort of a barbaric wilderness. So it was very difficult for anybody who didn't come and be based in New York or Washington or Boston to be taken seriously. He lives in where? Arizona. Oh yeah, cowboy country. Of course you can't get serious literature from there.
You mean they can read?
Yeah, quite, so I think... But it's also the fact that he rails against, the establishment so much and everything, but at the same time he wanted them to respect him.
Yeah,
there's a contradiction there. It's also like,
Yeah, I mean, that's...
You're attacking them. Come on. And it's not as though he wasn't commercially... he wasn't at first. He was a successful novelist. The Monkey Wrench Gang. This and the Monkey Wrench Gang are his two best-selling books. So it's not... So you don't understand if you said no one reads my novels, I'm really disappointed. But it was almost like, but the right people don't read them. The people I want respect from are not giving it me. But that's what I was saying, that's the thing with, with Abbey, in that he wanted both. But he became very bitter over what he didn't get, which is sad in a way, as opposed to, enjoying what he did have and what he could do, do well. But just the fact that he was never taken seriously, very much saw himself as a sort of, anarchist rebel against society. But he still wanted the respect of that society. And sadly as well, the respect he did get, he didn't regard as significant. So all the people who did like what he was doing and supported him, he didn't think they were the wrong people, because they weren't the literary establishment.
It's, people have these dinner party lists, don't they? I think I'd like him on mine,
yes.
Should we hear a little bit of Abbey? Is that okay?
Yeah.
That'd be lovely.
I'll read this bit. I'll just set a little bit of context.
No, by all means.
This is Desert Solitaire, which is probably his best-known book. It was his first non-fiction book, and it's based around the time he's worked as a ranger in Arches National Park, which is a desert national park in Utah. So this is him talking about the book, but I think it has much wider implications, should we say, including for Scotland at the moment. Okay, here we go. Finally, a word of caution. Do not jump into your automobile next June and rush out to the canyon country hoping to see some of that which I have attempted to evoke in these pages. In the first place, you can't see anything from a car. You've got to get out of the goddamn contraption and walk, better yet crawl, on hands and knees, over the sandstone and through the thorn bush and cactus. When traces of blood begin to mark your trail, you'll see something. Maybe. Probably not. In the second place, most of what I write about in this book is already gone or going under fast. This is not a travel guide, but an elegy, a memorial. You're holding a tombstone in your hands, a bloody rock. Don't drop it on your foot. Throw it at something big and glassy. What do you have to lose?
Fantastic. And very concise.
Yeah, very concise and very pointed. And what reminded me of this passage, which I hadn't read for some time, was Dunmaglass again, the wind farm, but also by a complete coincidence, I wasn't expecting this. The next book I've got coming out is a picture book on the Cairngorms, which would be the first book I've done where the photographs are the main point of it.
Oh, great.
And the layouts were sitting in my in-tray yesterday when I got back, PDFs of them, which I wasn't expecting any time soon. And I've only had a chance, to look through them and see the layouts and what the pictures look like. And I did that, and I also downloaded the photographs that I took yesterday when I was out. And then when I thought about them, I thought, You can't see a single wind farm in any of these pictures. I wonder how long that'll be true. And then I thought, so I wonder really, you know, is this book and is the Scotland book, at least to some extent, you know, historical records. This is how it was, but it's not going to remain like that. And that reminded me of that passage, because that's essentially what Abbey is saying, you know, about the area, you know, in the 1960s where he was working.
This is a eulogy.
It's going.
Yeah.
This book, you're not going to come and find it just like it is in this book, because some of it's already gone and the rest is going. You know, but it's also you know, a call to some sort of action.
Yeah.
He's not saying go away and despair.
Yeah.
You know, his thing about, you know, throw it at something big and glassy, what have you got to lose? He's essentially saying you might as well get out and fight for this.
Yeah. Yeah. Call to arms.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think and increasingly, as we were talking about earlier, that looks like it might be happening, certainly independently of, or in conjunction with the organisations that you know that you know.
This grassroots movement. It's interesting that, you know, Dunmaglass seems to have been the trigger, and it's maybe, you know, it's one wind farm too far. It's the one where people have woken and thought, wait a minute. Not just local people. I mean, nearly all the wind farms have had local action groups against them. But as I say, most of the people, if not all, get involved in this are not. And me and Cameron are probably the only two people who are actually, you know, in any way local to it. So this is people who are looking at it from afar, a lot of them, as I say, from England, and saying, wait a minute, what are they doing to this landscape?
Yeah.
This is not on. We have to make a stand on this, and not leaving it to the organisations, you know, who've traditionally fought these things.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's nothing like a bit of DIY, isn't there? It's kind of, you know, it's you know, the organisations are fantastic, but you know, it's there's nothing like a bit of direct action.
Well, it's much better to have a grassroots, because I think, you know, and I know we have this in the Mountaineering Council of Scotland. One of the problems with organisations, even ones that are mostly, you know, like we are, is volunteer work. You know, yes, we have some full-time officials, but without a lot of volunteer work, you know, an awful lot would not get done. But you've still got the thing that many members still see themselves as separate from the organisation. So the members say, what are you doing about this? Why are you allowing this wind farm to be built? They're not saying, what are we doing about it? Yeah. So they expect the organisation, which they support, to do something about it. You know, the thing with the grassroots thing that's good is this is people who aren't saying, why isn't the MCFS doing this? Why hasn't the JMT stopped this wind farm? They're saying, we ought to be making a stand on this. We ought to be protesting. We ought to be organising something, and not expecting, you know, where's the organisation that's fighting this on our behalf?
Thanks for bringing this to our attention. Right, let's go.
Let's do. Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
You've got a couple of other books.
Yeah, I've got to. You suggested bringing something of my own.
Absolutely.
Which was even harder trying to find something.
I imagine that might have been the bigger challenge. It's harder to choose. And
let me see if I can.
So this is from your book, The Munros and Tops.
Yeah, and this is more rather than reading something that echoes the Edward Abbey. You know, this is in the preface to the book. So this is, you know, not actually about it, but this is the book telling the story, yes, of the Munros and Tops, my walk over them. But this is where I'm writing about what being in the hills means, and again, it's part of the thing that, you know, that you were asking before about long walks and the difference. Anyway, here's the piece. See what you think. Days in the hills are a restorative, a way of slowing, relaxing, unwinding, and shedding the stresses of daily life. Watching a buzzard wheeling overhead, gazing into a rippling burn, navigating carefully across a mist-shrouded hillside, all set you firmly in the present when nothing matters beyond the moment and where you are responsible for yourself. This, I think, is far more conducive to health and well-being than any amount of happy pills, sleeping potions, or other chemical substitutes. A day in the hills, even a physically exhausting one, can lead to feelings of energy and renewed confidence in your ability to cope with everyday life. Indeed, perhaps it is the physically exhausting, physically challenging days that are the most beneficial, because they provide something not usually found in most people's daily lives. Facing real challenges in uncontrolled wild country can have a marvellously recuperative effect. As well as helping you stay mentally well balanced, going to the hills is also, of course, a superb way to keep physically healthy.
That's great. And a nice counter to the Abbey stuff as well. Yeah, lovely.
And of course, Abbey does say this as well. There's another passage in Abbey where he reminds people, don't get bogged down in just campaigning. Remember to take time to actually go out and enjoy what you're campaigning about. You can't be a full-time conservation campaign. So he does,
I know exactly that section. Yeah. No, he sort of go out and go out and enjoy yourself.
Yeah, and that echoes. John Muir said the same as well. Who was another inspirational and major campaigner. But I mean, Muir says, you must go out there, and it's a thing of, apart from anything else, and this is where I think some of the urban environmentalists have lost contact with their original roots, is to remind yourself, what are you doing this for? Why did you get involved in this? Because, I mean, one of the founders of Friends of the Earth, which began in the States, David Brower, his main aim was the preservation of wilderness. I think he would be absolutely horrified at what Friends of the Earth has become.
Spinning in his grave. Yeah.
The idea that Friends of the Earth was in favour of industrialising wild places is the complete opposite of what he began. But again, he was an active climber, wilderness camper and so on. He was out there doing a lot. Yeah. He didn't. Well, I mean, he broke with the Sierra Club because he didn't think they were being forceful enough about protecting wilderness. And Friends of the Earth was founded, in part as a reaction, a more militant group than the Sierra Club. Yeah. And he also saw what the Sierra Club sees now but didn't then, that you couldn't isolate conservation from everything else, that there were general environmental problems that affected what happened with conservation, which is why Friends of the Earth, from the beginning was concerned with recycling and plastic waste and other things which aren't directly to do with, preserving wild places. But of course now, Friends of the Earth has stopped being interested in nature and wild places. It's like the urban side of it has become all there is.
It's sort of energy management rather than a broader picture.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, they say they've lost contact with their roots and with nature as well.
You're listening to the award-winning UK Business Podcaster of the Year.
The home of UK-based audio and video podcasts for lovers of the great outdoors everywhere.
Podcasts are based solely around self-powered travel.
This is the Outdoor Station.
Bearing in mind that this is going to go out on a London-based radio station, I think that's definitely one thing to stress, is that it's very easy to get. I mean, I know, as we were talking about earlier, as I mentioned earlier, It's very easy to get locked into London, and it's a hard place to get out of. You've got to drive for a couple of hours to, especially now, it's quite congested. But and I'm sure this is perhaps something that you might echo, is that let's just to stress, get out as often as you can.
And I think on that score, I mean, a different idea that's probably appropriate here is, of course, I've talked mostly about big wild places, the Scottish Highlands, the Pacific Northwest, right, and Arizona and so on, which are not quickly accessible from most big cities, certainly not from London. But I think it's also true that there are lots of small wild places that are much more accessible. And where they're all that's left, they also need to be protected and conserved. And so, yes, from London to come up here for a week is great, but you're not going to come up here for a day. It's not even possible. No. You're probably not going to come up, unless you're really fanatical, for a weekend, because the travelling time is such, it's not worth it. It's not justified. But there are all sorts of little places. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
Which are worth going to. And I mean, a recent book on this is Robert Macfarlane's, Wild Places book, because it's one of the points he makes in there. Because I mean, he's an academic in Cambridge, so he's not living in a big wild area. But he talks about local places, to him, and I'm sure, which is a campaign that's not relevant up here, but which I would still support. The campaign, which again seems to be mostly a grassroots one, about the sell-off of forests in England, is again about an awful lot of people wanting to protect their local wild places, which may not be very big, but which are very important. And this sell-off is seen as threatening that, because these are places where, if you can't get up here, but you can get to your nearest wood, and go for a walk or go camping or whatever.
One of the places, and just to share a little something from when I was a youngster. I mean, I grew up in South London, and there's nothing really around like that. I guess the nearest thing would be over sort of Shirley Hills, Gravel Hill. It's certainly not wild. But the place that I used to go for a bit of peace of mind, as you just talked about, you just read from your book, was it was an old brickworks that had then regrown, and far from glamorous, and certainly not the Highlands. I wouldn't make claim that it was anywhere near as beautiful as that. But that was where I went as a young teenager, just to get a bit of space. And a bit of horizon as well, because that's the other thing. When you're in the city, it's kind of your horizon's blocked the whole time. So I'm also reading at the moment a book about the woods by Roger Deakin. Do you know him?
Oh, Wildwood.
Yeah. That's a good read as well.
I've read that. That's an excellent book.
Yeah, it's really nice, and again a very kind of personal, quite inspiring journey, talking about woods and local things, small things, and it doesn't have to be on a, as you say, it doesn't have to be on a grand scale. The grand stuff is grand, but
Well, I think for that, forests are particularly important because of the restricted view, oddly enough, because it means you can go into a small wood,
right? Yeah.
And you can't see outside it. So round the wood there may be, huge agribusiness fields with combine harvesters and so on, and no hedges anymore. There may be rows of power lines. There may be, a motorway and all the rest of it. So it may look anything but wild. But when you're in the wood, you can't see any of that. So it can still feel like, this is a wild place, and you can easily imagine it could be much bigger than this, because you don't know it isn't visually.
Yeah, you can go get reconnected there. Yeah.
And of course, the other thing is that even if there's noisy things around, woods deaden sound very effectively. So you may be standing and thinking that motorway is going to really annoy me. This roar of traffic all the time. But you can go into a wood, and lose it completely because it's deadened in the trees.
Mm.
So I can see that, particularly in the flat areas of southern England, woods are really very important.
Great.
And obviously a lot of people from this growing protest movement,
feel
think
the same way.
feel
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. Yeah. Now, obviously, not to give anything away that you'd prefer not to, but is there? I guess a sort of a closing question really would be, what's next for you? Are you planning another long distance trail as yet, or?
I'm always thinking, of another one. I don't actually have a specific one in mind at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I have a few ideas. I mean, one of them relates to Edward Abbey in that, probably a decade ago now, a couple of outdoor Edward Abbey fans in the States did a long route in the desert southwest, starting at Arches National Monument and going through to the Grand Canyon, and they called it the Hayduke Trail. Hayduke, of course, being one of the heroes of the Monkey Wrench gang, fictional. And their whole intention with this will never be an official trail or anything else. And again, it's not really a trail, it's a route. But there is a guidebook available to it. And I'd been interested in doing another long-distance walk, in the desert southwest. I mean, I did the Arizona Trail through Arizona. I probably wouldn't follow the Hayduke Trail exactly. I'd modify it so it went to places I was interested in, which would seem highly appropriate for the idea anyway.
I'm sure he'd love that.
What is a rigid structure for something like that. But certainly another walk down there would interest me, because I still think of all the places I've been, which include Nepal, Everest Base Camp, and Greenland, Iceland, and a lot of spectacular places, the Grand Canyon is the most astonishing place I've ever seen. It's one of the places. The first time I went there, and I went there because I'd read Edward Abbey and because I'd read Colin Fletcher, who's the other person I put with Abbey, as a major person for me to read, and who's influenced my writing. And Colin Fletcher was the first person to walk the length of the Grand Canyon inside the canyon without coming up to the rim. And he wrote a superb book called The Man Who Walked Through Time about it.
No, I've not read.
Which is arguably certainly my favourite map-packing book, because it's one journey in one book. I mean, Edward Abbey never wrote a book about any one trip, so he didn't write anything like that. But even though I'd read the books and I'd seen, as everyone has, lots of pictures of the Grand Canyon, I still remember I got there. You get the bus to Grand Canyon Village on the South Rim. I mean, that's the easiest access point. And I got off the bus and I walked to the rim, and this is in a village. There's lots of people around, there's a wall, you look down, and I knew what to expect, I thought. And I walked to the rim and I looked down and I just stared at it and thought, oh, wow, and couldn't take it in.
Sure.
Even though it was an image I'd seen in pictures, the reality was absolutely astounding. And I was looking at it and my brain wouldn't work. I thought, I don't know what I'm looking at. I can't place the scale, And it was only, I'd ended a 10-day walk inside the canyon. And it was only by going into the canyon and spending time there I even started to, have a grasp of how extraordinary it was and how big it is. And I'd say, and nowhere else have I been, have I felt like it or seemed like that.
Sure. So somewhere back there, and perhaps for the future.
Yeah. I'd certainly like to get back there, and I'd like to incorporate it again into some sort of long distance trip. I mean, it's the Arizona Trail crosses the Grand Canyon, so I've been there twice. I went back when I did that trail, and also I think, I must be honest and say, because the Pacific Northwest Trail ended up with a month of almost constant rain, it'd be nice to go somewhere warm and sunny where it probably isn't going to rain at all, maybe. But if I can do one final one, because this is very new. There will be the March, February TGO, March TGO will have stuff on at this. A book that I picked up in the autumn that I hadn't heard of before, called Ribbon of Wildness, and about the watershed of Scotland. I thought, that's curious, I'll have a look at this. And the author, Peter Wright, spent a year walking the watershed in bits, not continuously, and plotting it, very meticulously and writing about it. And he's arguing that there's actually, it's wild almost the whole way, right the way from the English border up to Duncansby Head.
Right.
And you've got, as he calls it, Ribbon of Wildness, this strip of wild land running right the way up Scotland, which has never really been written about before, most of which is not very well known. It goes over loads of, minor summits and tops, because the key to it is not, is this the Munro, there's 40 odd on the watershed, but is it on the watershed? And I was also fascinated by that and thought, this is a great idea. This is a whole new idea in an area I thought I knew really well.
Yeah.
That, as he says, he couldn't find any. And I thought, all the research I did for the Scotland book, how often was the watershed mentioned? I couldn't think of once.
Right.
I mean, there is, Dave Hewitt did a watershed walk back in the 1980s and wrote a book, which is a good book, called Walking the Watershed, which I read. I've got a copy of, and I do refer to that in here. But his book is about his walk and his experience of it, not about the watershed directly. So I never really picked up from that there was anything special or significant about the watershed in itself. Whereas Ribbon of Wildness, it's the watershed the author wants to promote.
Yeah.
So I did think, that's a new long-distance walk in Scotland that had never occurred to me before. What a brilliant idea.
And it's right in your backyard.
And it's yeah. Well, the other thing was, in some of it, to follow the book, I had to get the maps out.
Right.
Because it's fairly dense with information and lots of names I didn't recognise. But I also realised, I've camped on the watershed.
Yeah.
I've been up summits on the watershed. But without registering it, I didn't know. Some of these I've only known because I read the book. Oh yeah, I remember. I've camped by that loch. I didn't know it was on the watershed. Oh, I didn't know that summit. And in places where, the watershed comes a long way east at one point. It comes over Ben Alder.
Right.
It's east of Craigmeggy. I would have assumed it was west of there, but it's not. So it's not exactly where
you'd expect it
I'd
to
have
be.
expected it to be.
Yeah.
So that's another,
it sounds like
totally different to the Southwest USA.
Cracking walk. Chris, thank you so much. It's been it has been a privilege to meet you, and a really interesting chat for me. And just thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed it.
Cheers.
Cheers.
I can almost hear the clicking of the keyboards now as everyone leaps to their computer and Googles Edward Abbey. My thanks to Chris and David for sharing their conversations in the last 3 podcasts. For more from them, of course, you can find them on the web at christownsendoutdoors.com and selfpowered.blogspot.com. So I think it's only fair and just that I should conclude this podcast with an amusing quote from Edward Abbey, just before you press the stop button on your iPod. No tyranny is so irksome as petty tyranny. The officious demands of policemen, government clerks, and electromechanical gadgets. So until next time, folks, keep enjoying the world around you and stay tuned for your next download from theoutdoorstation.co.uk.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To hear more from our extensive free library, please visit the website at theoutdoorstation.co.uk.
You can now follow The Outdoor Station on Facebook, where we chat about each programme we produce, answer questions and discuss future productions. Why not join us there?
This podcast is produced and hosted by theoutdoorstation.co.uk.